Okay, let's try this. Okay, let's pretend that we're actually talking. I just hope they heard and not a good sign. Okay. But that's it. Okay. So like, what's the weather there in Austin?
It's actually pretty cold and gloomy, which is weird because this time of year it's usually already super hot. So it's it's depressing and gray for like the last 3 weeks.
Depressing and gray.
Yeah, hopefully it returns to normal, but the weather in Austin shifts
Oh, really?
so frequently that it could be sweltering hot one day and it could be freezing cold the next day.
Recently, I watched some like like I think it was like Food Network or something like that, and then like two very well known like grill or barbecue or grill houses which are like close to each other, always fighting for customers, like
Oh yeah.
from Austin, some like famous places to eat. I don't know. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't eat meat actually, but it was like very interesting to watch.
Yeah.
And
People love their barbecue here. That's for
wait a
sure.
second, like David Tilton is also from Austin. Am I right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He's an awesome guy. We're going to grab drinks next week.
Oh,
Right,
great, great,
David?
great, great. Yeah, he's here. We had an interview with him. Yeah, that's cool. Austin, Austin. Like we grew up on that film. Not actually grew up, but that film, Dazed and Confused, like was very dear to us,
Oh yeah.
to me and my crew here
Hmm.
in faraway Croatia. So for some reason we really kind of like the vibe of that movie.
Yeah.
Uh, okay, so looks like
It look.
they can hear us.
Yeah.
So before we start, as usual, I do some promotional messages, and this time again is the IFCC event that starts in 1 month and like maybe 10 days in Croatia, Split, beautiful Mediterranean Sea, and all that goes with it. I hope you guys will join us. There'll be 24 instructors, to who will come to teach you, and yeah, 6 days of art, sun, and fun. Summer season has already started in a way here, so it will be really nice. Some beautiful landscapes to explore. To bring your art gear. To do some live actions as well, and it's all happening in the center like of the city, old town, so hope to see you guys there. And that being said, okay, in the lower left corner what you see, this rabbit, this is our mascot, the kid, or the IFCC kid. So right now I'm doing some kind of promo materials for the event, so uh, just started animating it, in case you're wondering like what's jumping there in the corner. And now we'll move to Ken's screen, and also we'll ask Ken to introduce himself. Just a second. Let me first unplug all this and do this. And yeah, everyone should see your screen in a second. Just wait some more. Okay, Ken, I think you can introduce yourself. I'll just type here, ask people to let us know one more time if they can hear us. But you can start talking.
All right. Cool. All right. So hey everyone. Thanks again, Marco, for inviting me on. I'm super excited to be here.
Welcome.
Uh, yeah. Any opportunity to get in front of other like-minded people and just talk about concept art and the film and game industry is I think a awesome opportunity. So yeah, thank you again for inviting me. So my name is Ken Fairclough. I've been doing concept art in the game industry for about 5 years now. I've also done some work in film. The majority of my background has been doing environment concept art for games. I do also do characters and creatures, but I think I've just kind of gotten known for doing environments. The majority of my portfolio kind of consists of that kind of stuff. I love doing environments and characters all the same. Most of my professional experience has been doing designing environments, stuff like this, anywhere from designing settlements and architectural palettes and stuff like this, as well as designing crops and smaller, more contained areas. The most recent projects I've worked on was Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem. Which were both really, really incredible experiences to work on. Growing up, BioWare was one of my favorite companies. So to get the chance to work in-house at BioWare has been such an amazing experience. So it's still continuing to do environment concept art on my free time. For a while, I was doing some teaching, kind of taking a break for a little bit from that right now, but. Who knows in the future, I might have some tutorials or gumroads, or maybe get back into teaching some classes. Just kind of scrolling through here. These are some of the works that I've done recently for Anthem. And a lot of the stuff that you're seeing is a combination of 3D renders and paintovers, which is a very common process in my workflow. Pretty much I'm always utilizing some form of 3D, whether it's a very, very rudimentary blockout with just like basic shapes and forms, and sometimes it is a little bit more detailed and focused on actual layout and architecture like this. This is actually the stuff that I really enjoy doing the most is designing like worlds and focusing on the architectural palette and trying to integrate as much culture and storytelling into those environments as possible. I think the same could be said for most of the people like here in the chat or most other creative folks in our industry. Like Star Wars was a huge influence on me when I was a kid. It's probably the single reason why I became a creative person is and I think the thing about Star Wars that really kind of got me into wanting to create and make art even as a child was this sense of when you see something on screen in a movie like Star Wars, they do such a good job at world building and creating this illusion that what you're seeing on screen for that 1 or 2 or maybe 3 seconds is just a small slice of a world that continues to exist after the viewer has left that frame, right? Or the camera has panned over to somewhere else. There is such a sense of life and breath in those worlds that the storytelling is just done in such a way where it's not just about what you're seeing in front of you, but it's about creating this world that you can imagine all these other things and all these other stories that exist in that world outside of the main narrative that you're experiencing in that moment. I think that's one of the main reasons why with Star Wars in particular. With all the expanded universe and stuff, it's almost like every character has a backstory. So I think it's that sense of just world building and escapism and creating these new worlds that don't exist, but at the same time feel tangible and believable. I think those are the things that I think motivate me the most, regardless of what it is I'm designing. So and a lot of my work, I try to really get as much of that in as possible. That idea of just making, for example, this frame trying to get as much storytelling into that as possible, so that it feels as though this world is a real world that you can actually escape to and experience all these different things and whatnot. But,
Sorry, I fell asleep. Just kidding. Yeah, I agree with you. We touched on Star Wars world a lot in past streams. So obviously, it has some kind of a magic. I even offer compare it to like something that's totally opposite Lord of the Rings, because it's like this has this like clear line between like good and bad,
mhm.
that's happening, and also it's like there are a lot of futuristic and also fantasy stories, and films and games, and but like many of them maybe go too far into this dark apocalyptic mode, and they send this actually this negative message, and I
Mhm.
myself with my own story that I'm doing kind of fell into that trap as well, uh, but when you look at like Star Wars and like Lord of the Rings, actually these are like kind of positive stories, and I think that like subconsciously, like majority of people kind of want to want to hear a positive story, like with a happy end in the end. So
Yeah, it's all about escapism. You want to be
yeah.
able to escape from your daily worries and stresses, and I think especially in the current status of the world and politics and stuff, there's so much stuff to get caught up in and stressed out about. So I think stuff like Avengers and Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, I definitely feel like satisfies that need to just kind of shut off and escape from all of those realities. But in a lot of my personal work, actually, I really like to do exactly what you were just saying, though, is and pull a little bit more from reality and touch a little bit on like somewhat of the bleakness and more, I guess, negative aspects of the world, and because I think on the equal side of the coin of like escapism, there's a lot of really cool and compelling imagery and stories to tell that are more grounded and related to the things that we experience in our day to day as well. But yeah, it's almost like there's different moods for each. Like some days I'm just like, oh, you know what, I need to draw something super uplifting, and then other days I'm like, oh man, everything is falling apart. I need to do something super bleak and dark. So my taste is really kind of all over the spectrum. It's I really there's like a place for both sides of that. I feel like in my work, at least I try to kind of cover all aspects of it.
I see. So you're using like we can jump a bit more like into technical stuff, because
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think like many of those who are here actually want to also learn how you do things. So
yeah, absolutely.
you said like, and you have shown that you are combining 3D with paint overs as, I guess like I mean we could say that majority of concept artists is doing this these days.
Mhm.
Uh, but like your works have like a really high quality, execution. So, and I did like examine it a bit, like few scenes, especially from Anthem uh, project that you posted on ArtStation. So you really do go far with this 3D, like, and I'm just like, I'm just, I just want to know like how much time do you spend in 3D, and then how much time do you spend in Painter, because this is like a full 3D scene that we were seeing before these doors. So this is like a lot of work here. I mean, even if it's some of it is kid bashing, so there's still a lot of like well done 3D objects, and of course the composition is great. So how do you start with this? And how far do you
Uh,
go?
yeah. Well, so working in an in-house setting is a little bit different than the way I would work personally. In that, obviously, it's a much more collaborative effort. So I'm really fortunate to be able to work with like super talented people, and be able to kind of work on stuff back and forth with them. It's actually one of my favorite things about working in in-house positions is that collaborative atmosphere. But for example, in this scene, a lot of the smaller props I was actually able to export from the engine and use in-engine assets to kind of use as a starting point. So, for example, a lot of these smaller props and things that kind of add that sense of detail and that kind of lived-in sense. It was stuff that I happen to have access to, like for example these flags and some of these other simpler props. But then a lot of the other stuff, like the architecture itself, that was all built by myself in 3ds Max. But I really try to approach like 3D blockouts the same way I would as if I was sketching on paper, which like I feel like is inherently counterintuitive because 3D modeling is just such a I guess like defined process. Like it's not as organic as sketching, so just inherently it's slower, right? So, but I tried to think of it as a sketch. So, the same way I would start off like a speed painting or a sketch is kind of the same way I would approach a 3D blockout. So it's obviously it's just about starting with very basic blocky forms and just kind of establishing the major shapes and establishing a hierarchy between big, medium, and small. So really focusing on those like fundamentals and getting those in place first. So getting a nice balance of big, medium, and small, knowing where I want my focal point to be and making sure that I have the most contrast in terms of detail versus iris, and the most contrast in terms of light value. And once I've kind of established those things, everything else kind of falls into place. And not only that, once you've established that, you can kind of take a step back and evaluate if the blockout is good enough to move on to paint over. Because in a lot of cases, it wouldn't even be necessary to take a blockout to this stage, right? But in this particular case, this was somewhat of a hero location in our game, right? A location that players are going to interact with frequently, right? So there is a little bit more time spent on really fleshing that out and making sure that that's something that we're confident moving forward with. So there is a little bit of a give and take, right? So, on some of these blockouts, they're taken a little bit further than others, but it's all about evaluating the importance of that design. How is it actually going to be interacted with? What is the narrative importance of that location, right? But a lot of the things that also help give it those kind of smaller details, like for example, a lot of these shapes on the arch itself. I knew I could have just quickly modeled it out, and then maybe a super quick way would have been to just like create a cylinder and then boolean out these shapes. But I didn't really need these shapes to be super clean, right? So I was okay with them being somewhat jagged because I know that this architecture is supposed to be somewhat old and ancient, so having a little bit of character and variation in the edges was okay, right? But also, I'm going to be painting on top of this stuff, so I'm okay if like the model isn't perfect, right? Like there's a lot of things in here, for example, like little details that maybe hinder the believability. Like not everything is exactly connected to each other or draped around in a believable way, right? Or but that's stuff that like I can paint back in very easily, so I don't bother wasting time on it. So I think a big part of it is just being constantly aware of how important these things are, and weighing how much of this is something that I can add in the paint over versus having in the blockout. But yeah, so the way that I did do these shapes was actually just really simple in Photoshop. I just painted a really simple height map with these extrusions in it, and actually right in Photoshop turned that into a 3D extrusion, and then just re-imported it right into my scene. And that ended up being, more than enough for what I needed. So yeah, I do think it's just a lot of, examining how much time and how much importance you're going to place on these things, and making sure you're focusing on the things that are truly important first, and storytelling and composition is always comes first, right? So, much like a sketch, I always start there. Here's another example of one that was taken a little bit further. So this was for one of our cinematics, one of the settlements in our cinematics, right? So this was a situation where if the time was spent to work on the concept blockout, and then that design is approved, I can then go and hand that blockout off to the cinematic artists, and they have a good starting point to then build out that scene, because they have the 3D geometry, they know exactly the dimensions and the footprint of that environment. It's already been approved, right? So again, it's also that collaborative side of things that I think is just so beneficial to, especially in a game setting. Working in games, something that I've kind of learned over the last couple of years is just how many problems there are to solve around it every corner. It doesn't matter what game you're working on. There's every time a solution is found, there's other issues that need to be solved and accounted for. And a lot of times with environments, it's stuff like performance and player traversal and leading the player to specific objectives. And I think that those are things that can be that are commonly overlooked, I think, especially when people are creating portfolios to break into the industry, is just that aspect of being able to be versatile and solve these problems while still trying to achieve the director's original vision, which I think is probably the most challenging but most rewarding aspect of creating concept art, is being able to take that vision from the director and turn it into something real and tangible, while also still taking into account all these other disciplines and departments that also have needs that need to be met. So, but working in 3D really helps kind of close that gap in a way, because it just makes it so much easier to then hand this off to an environment artist or a level designer, for example, to actually go and then put this into the game and see if, okay, does that fit our intended design direction for the gameplay in this space, or for, does the scale read well at player scale? Because that's another thing, is, designing 2D, you can have a really great, really well rendered out scene, or really nice tight line drawing, right? Which works wonders, right? But once it gets to understanding the scale from the player's perspective and how it's actually going to be interacted with, having an actual 3D asset really helps that tremendously. And that's especially with modern AAA games, being able to close the gap from the point in which something is designed, and the perspective and the context in which something is designed, and closing that gap with the way it will be actually experienced, is, I think, super important, because there's so many things I think that can come up, that can go wrong, or challenges or problems that can come up from the point of handing off a 2D concept to the 3D team. So again, just having that thing to kind of tie the two together and kind of hand off and work collaboratively and work back and forth and stuff, it makes that process so much more manageable.
Okay. I was trying to pay attention to your wise words
Oh,
of wisdom.
hopefully I didn't put you asleep again.
No, no, man. I'm just trying to, like beat these technical issues that people are reporting. But that's like my fault. Um, anyway, I'll just go through some questions here. Just a second. Okay, it's okay, dude. We can get everything Ken is saying. Oh, okay, this is the most important thing. So, if they can't hear me well, just try to repeat my question or whatever, or just you know, make it clear what you're talking about. So, let's go here. Someone asked, are these like 3ds Max, 3D, models, I guess, but let me go back to this. As a concept artist, do you usually play your role at the beginning of project and then move on to other things, or do you take part in the modeling stage and maybe texturing? So, yeah. So,
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Again, just to repeat in case anyone couldn't hear, is my involvement in just like at the early, like the modeling and like kind of more, I guess, blue sky phase, or is it carry into some of the later stages, like modeling and texturing? I can't really speak to like other like experiences like movies and stuff like that, because my experience there is a lot less. But in games, based on my experience, it's really kind of a constant thing. Like it's never at any point is something handed off and my job is like done, right? In a lot of cases, a concept could be handed off to an environment team, and then we'll come back for additional paint overs, right? Because again, even when a 3D asset is handed off, there's still certain things that don't translate well and have to be adjusted once it's brought into the actual engine, right? So that's when we would do polished paint overs. But also sometimes when a modeler is going and modeling, for example, one of the designs, they might toss over a screenshot and say like, hey, is there anything in here that you can tweak that you think would make it closer to the approved design? Or so it really is a constant back and forth, yeah, at no point is there ever like a clean handoff and that's it, and that's like I'll never see it or touch it again. It really is a much more collaborative effort, and again, that's one of my favorite things about working in the game industry and in an in-house position, because I myself am very embedded with the environment team, so we're essentially kind of all part of the same team. So yeah, there's a constant back and forth and open dialogue between myself and them, as well as the level designers.
what was your biggest struggle so far? I mean, since you joined the studio, like, were there any like real insecurities? Were you afraid of some situations? Like, that you'll be joining like a big project tomorrow. Like, were there any stuff that you are really not sure that you would be able to pull off, and how did you pull it off in the end?
Oh yeah, so yeah, there was a ton of things. I think also again, most creative people tend to be very perfectionistic and very self-aware and also self-conscious and stuff like that. So yeah, absolutely. There's I would say the biggest thing that I had to overcome, or biggest hurdle that was somewhat of I guess, a burden over me for a long time, was actually learning 3D. When I first got my first job working in the game industry, at that time I was using very little 3D in my workflow, and I was almost entirely doing like photo bash and paint overs, and anytime I did do a 3D block out, it was very, very rudimentary, very basic. Um, And at my first gig, kind of doing some background and looking up all the people I was going to be working with, I was seeing all this insanely detailed 3D stuff and like just really super clean environments, you know, the kind of environment concept art where there's never any questions regarding like the three-dimensionality of the space, like the perspective, the foreshortening, just the scale of the space just felt super clean, and that was terrifying to me because at that time I was not well versed in 3D at all. But once I you know started that job, I realized that you know people that work in the game industry are like the most willing to share information and help you learn. And again, at that job, I was really fortunate to work with really, really talented people. So, you know, I was able to kind of get enough, you know, pick up enough information for me to start kind of practicing more in my free time. And it's kind of at that point when it dawned on me that, you know, new like tools and techniques, they come and go so often, so frequent, especially in this industry with technology changing so rapidly. You know, yeah, that kind of stuff comes and goes. But as long as you have a really good foundation and understanding of the fundamentals and you know core design principles and composition. Essentially, you know, with the amount of knowledge that's available nowadays, you know, a tool really is no more than that. It's just a tool. It's just a means of you getting to, you know, communicate your idea successfully. So I've kind of learned to let go of that stress of learning new techniques and just kind of really just focus on the fundamentals and stuff like that. And you know, I think right now is actually a great example of another thing that you know it is stressful, but ultimately you can't let it get to you too much. But with I think recently there's been a lot of you know concept art you know moving to Octane and 3D Code and Blender, and these are three programs that I don't have a lot of experience with, but you know, a couple of years ago, I would have been super stressed about that. Like, oh, you know, the standards are changing, and I need to, you know, keep up with this. And while that is super important, you know, I feel like I've picked up enough tools along the way where, like, once you have to learn a new program, like super quickly, like I feel like the fear of having to learn more new programs kind of goes away because you know, again, there's so much information available like on YouTube and tutorials that you know, the foundations and like the fundamentals are really as core what's super important, you know, and I strongly believe that, you know, anyone that is, you know, remotely capable can learn a new program with practice. So that was a really drawn out long answer, but
It's
one other
totally
thing.
fine. It's totally fine. It's better that you talk because they can barely hear me. So please
Uh,
continue.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, it's one of those things where once I started talking about it, like I started to like almost like you know put myself back in that place, and I realized, oh yeah, I used to be terrified of that. And another thing that used to really be stressful to me was like learning how to navigate like the politics of working on a team. And when I say that, I mean learning how to talk to people and how to interact with people and how to write emails and it sounds like something that's not like that stressful, but it's not really something that people that you can like learn before like going into it. There's no, it's not like there's a tutorial out there on how to answer emails to your art director as a concept artist, right? But there are a lot of things that you have to kind of pick up on navigating those things, and you know how to provide feedback in a constructive way, or you know stuff like that. It's one of those things where you don't really know until you're there, and you're forced to kind of pick up on those things. But yeah, I think a good piece of advice for anyone else that is a little stressed about that aspect of things is to just be social. I personally was, I tend to be pretty extrovert as is, but when it comes to like professional development and stuff like that, I tend to be a little bit reserved and quiet. But I think just being social and interacting with other artists and whatnot is just really good practice for how to handle yourself in those kinds of situations and how to just be a good like team player and just function as part of a larger unit in a really really well and productive way.
Okay. What I'll try to do now, we'll just do like a 1 minute pause, just to like final try to solve this echo thing. I know
Okay.
for anyone here, I know that this is like totally unprofessional and it's totally my fault, but I would try to fix this if possible. So what I'll do now, like I'll ask you a question, and you just answer with, I don't know, it's sunny day outside. So, so whenever I ask you this question, please answer the answer. So just so I can do some move some sliders here and see if anything changes, and you guys will let us know if the things are working okay. So, uh, so let's try this. Like, okay, okay, just a second. I'll do this. So, what's the weather outside?
Oh, do you want me to respond?
Yeah, you can. Please do.
It is cold and gray.
Okay. And now I'll ask you again the same thing, and then guys will let us know like if the first one was the better than the other one, or vice versa. So let's do this again. What's the weather outside?
Cold and gray.
Okay. So can you guys just let us know which one worked better? Which one worked better, the first one or the second one? We'll just wait for a second. So just let us know which one worked better, like the first question and answer or the second question and answer. Yeah. Second one was better. Okay, second one was better, so I'll try to okay, second one was better, so I'll do this, and I'll just talk for a while. You can say a few words, so just so they can confirm if this has solved the problem. Can you just say something, whatever, like 3ds,
Sure.
3ds Max is better than Blender, although I don't believe that.
3ds Max is awesome and is equally matched to Blender and Maya.
Okay, I like the answer.
Yeah, it's a political answer.
Yeah, we'll just wait like just 10 more seconds. I want to make sure that I did it right, and then we can continue. And I hope this curse of mine will go. Maybe not permanently, but for this session anyway.
Until the next one.
Yeah. So guys, like there is it. You made it work. Okay. And like I just want to say something, guys. Like I really apologize because of this, and this is totally my fault. I can't blame this on any technical problems with my computer. It's just that like you know about the festival, you know about our websites, this stuff. And the reality is like only like one man and sometimes two guys are kind of working on it like through the year. So, and my problem, this is what I discussed with Ken before we started. My personal problem, of course, is that I just want to do too many things at once, and I'm like 40 now, and I don't think I'll ever change, but I know this is my biggest problem. So I once again I'll really apologize, being able to bring amazing artists as Ken is, and then just to like fuck up everything, kind of gets me mad, but let's just hope the rest of this interview will go smoothly. So let's continue.
Yeah,
Uh,
Marco, I can't believe you ruined everything. The
yeah,
world is falling apart now.
yeah. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry
No,
for this.
no, I'm joking. I'm totally joking, man. No
No,
worries at all.
I know you're not, but okay. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so I have some geeky questions, of my own, related to like software and more of technique stuff and so on. So first of all, we have seen some scenes where uh, you have to like do something like that looks like really really massive, like I don't know if that was a big foot of a robot or something, but there was this little character down there, and like what are your suggestions there, like how to solve this kind of like massive construction, because very often I notice that artists fail there. It's not, like it's not hard to to visualize something like that's really huge, like 1,000 meters high, compared to the human, because then people start like throwing like tons of bolts, and that kind
Hmm.
of side. But and when you measure, you realize, okay, this bolt is big as like 3 humans, which also doesn't make sense. That kind of stuff. Like so, how do you tackle these things? Do you actually think about it at all, or
Yeah, absolutely. So, communicating like scale and just massive scale is like one of my favorite things. Like, it kind of falls into like just like lighting and atmosphere, which is probably my favorite thing to like paint and add in. That's why I pretty much all of my personal work, the scenes are very foggy just because I love the drama of thick atmosphere. But anyways, I think this is actually a good example of talking about that without having all of like the details of like textures and lighting and or atmosphere and stuff like that. Because I think the biggest thing is having those scale cues to help communicate the size. Without even getting into atmospheric perspective or anything like that, I think first and foremost is it's kind of going back to that basics of contrast, right? You know, I feel like a lot of us has probably heard that kind of question when it comes to establishing the size of something. But how do you make something feel massive? You put something tiny right next to it, right? It's all about how things relate to each other and that contrast. So um, uh, when you're designing something that's supposed to feel massive and just huge, you have to have something in place there that is relatable, that we know what the scale is, so that we can then relate it to everything else in the scene. So, for example, in this scene, it's these catwalks and these smaller details here. This maybe is not the super best example of this idea, but this definitely does communicate it. Is when you see the catwalks and when you see these smaller details like these hanging nets and stuff like that, and these walkways and the height of the walkways and these paths. I at least I hope the majority of people are going to understand. Oh, okay, like that's human scale. I understand how big those platforms are because those look like those are made for human traversal, right? So if I know exactly how big a human is immediately when I look at this, it's going to make all these other shapes feel larger. Now, for example, if we were to get rid of all of the scale cues, right? So if we were to get rid of those catwalks and these like hanging nets and these towers here, I think communicating the scale is going to be it would be a lot more difficult here. Let me see if I can find another example. Um, let's see. So, like for example, in here, this structure is supposed to be just this massive fortification with these really large, thick walls, like protective walls. If there weren't these little bits of architecture and these tree canopies coming out from the top of here, it would be a lot more difficult to understand the scale here because there isn't really anything that is relatable to human size, right? So there isn't any windows, there aren't any doors or ladders. But as soon as you see one human like relatable scale object, like architecture or again a window or a ladder or a platform or a handrail, those kinds of things really help reinforce the scale. A lot of it also comes down to just the balance of big, medium, and small shapes. I think this is something that I come across in student work, for example. But it's this idea that detail equates quality, and that's completely incorrect. Because if you were to just cram detail all throughout this, right, it's going to become busy. And there isn't going to be a good balance between these shapes. You're gonna be affecting negatively the rhythm of the piece, and again, scale is just not going to communicate correctly. Whereas if you have a nice balance of areas, like pockets of detail placed near the important areas, like so functional areas or areas that are close to your point of interest and your focal point, and then have areas of high risk to kind of contrast that. Just that balance is going to feel more natural, and it's going to help you communicate the scale better. Like just shotgunning detail all over stuff is I think the quickest way to kill scale.
Okay, let's try and do a breakdown of this scene. So let's do a test. I'll ask you questions about particular parts of this illustration here that I still see. Now I don't anymore because of the lag. I'm watching the YouTube version. Can you open it back, the white castle of the future?
Yes, I can.
So I just this is me improvising. I just thought maybe people might have like the same questions as I do, and I always have a lot of questions, which sometimes it's annoying a bit. But I'm hoping that among these colleagues of ours here, there are also a lot of them who are actually just trying to become artists, and artists in the studio. So maybe they don't actually understand what's going on, and I myself don't understand everything, so I would just and of course it's always tons of different approaches to the same thing, but let's see how you do it. So let's start from the what's the closest to us. So we have these three characters here, and I won't be bothered too much about the composition. It's more about technical stuff, what elements make the scene. So these guys, they were were they added here as a a separate PNG into this composition in Photoshop, or were they rendered with this with a big scene?
So the characters were rendered separately. Originally, the composition did not have them there, and since this was a scene, so this was a concept done for one of our cinematics, and there was no narrative context for this scene, so I wanted to add some context to this that would key the viewer into what exactly is happening here. Maybe not into specifics, but for example, these three guys, when you look at them, immediately their exosuits and the fashion that they have on their suits is very clearly different than what you'd expect from whoever is living in here, right? So immediately the contrast between the colors, their exosuits being predominantly dark and black,
Yeah.
and being somewhat sinister looking,
Yeah.
right? There's more
Like
triangular shapes and angled shapes and stuff like that.
like
Uh,
Darth Vader cousin and his bodyguards came
yeah, exactly.
to visit. I don't know, like Gandalf the White.
Yeah,
Anyways,
yeah. So it's essentially that idea is that like it's everything though, even coming down to like the lighting, right? So the lighting is also like supposed to elicit this sense of like hope and like positivity, right? So this settlement was, it was supposed to be uh, it's one of the last main settlements of humankind, right? So this is like the last bastion of hope. And when you introduce into the foreground three sinister figures, kind of shadowy figures overlooking it, it kind of starts to like give this somewhat sense of like impending, doom, right? There's something that is going to happen. These people, whatever it is that they're doing, probably don't have good intentions, right?
okay. Let's move forward with elements in the scene. So first of all, I guess you don't have like a clay render of the scene, or at least where the majority of elements are in for this particular composition. So uh, I'll continue with the details. So this fortress, is this was this like brought into the scene in the same fashion, and then you just painted or deleted like some parts of the wall, so you make it like look natural in the scene here, or was this rendered like on already? You have created some terrain in your 3D software where you placed it.
Yep. So that's it. That's exactly what I did. So the terrain in here actually was placed in the scene. It was created with I think just very basic height maps, right in 3ds Max with a displace modifier, and then just layering on textures on top with additional displace modifiers to kind of layer on the detail. But again, like it's very quick, right? I try not to spend too much time on that stuff because again, that's stuff that I can paint back in very easily and then add in photos on top. Really what I'm after is just making sure, because this settlement, this particular like location is very dependent on the terrain around it. I wanted to make sure that it sat on top of the terrain in a natural way, and I had the kind of undulating terrain that wasn't like perfectly level to make it really feel as though this was built into the landscape and this has been here maybe for centuries. So yeah, in this particular scene, the terrain and the architecture were all rendered in the same scene, and then the three characters were rendered after the fact and then reintegrated in.
So
go
this,
ahead.
I mean, this includes when you say terrain, this includes also these two huge walls on the left in the background. Or
Yes.
and
Yes.
and the woods and the river, was this like just painted in like with some photo bashing, or for example, I mean the river obviously has some reflections here. Is this like water from or transparent material, reflective material from the render, which you later kind of colored, or was it brought in the same fashion as the forest was?
So it actually was part of the render. The scene, like, so when the scene was kind of being blocked out and like storyboarded, there was particular things that needed to happen, and there were certain things that needed to be in certain places. So like one of those things happened to be this river that happened to span across this valley. Again, a lot of this was trying to just make sure that I had the settlement really sitting in the terrain in a natural way to make it really feel as though that's been here for centuries. So I did take the time to just quickly block out like where that river would be, and then in Keyshot, for example, I did exactly what you had mentioned. I just rendered that with like a really simple like water material on there. So I would get proper reflections, and the nice thing about having that all in one scene is I'm able to render out additional images like this, for example. So this is the same scene, this is the same environment, but I'm able to then go and tweak the lighting and do a top-down view because uh, I knew that this cinematic was going to have multiple shots of the city, and I wanted to make sure that we figured out what this looked like from a bird's eye view as well. Because when it's first kind of blocked out and stuff like that and storyboarded, you don't necessarily know 100% of all of the shots that you're going to want to have included in there. So it was kind of more of a thing where, like, just in case, let's have this all designed out, and it'll be a fully fleshed out location that I can then go and render out multiple images and do multiple paintings of. So it makes the iteration process in designing a lot easier too, because our art director could look at like one particular area and say like, hey, this doesn't really read well from this angle. Let's make sure that this these shapes work better three-dimensionally, and instead of just iterating on the same 2D image, you might find that moving the camera one way, those shapes don't overlap in a really visually pleasing manner. So again, having that scene all blocked out and being able to pan around and find those nice compositions is just a really awesome added benefit. Also, in this scene, I will say I was really lucky enough. A lot of the fort structures, so the walls, I think I was able to start off with one of our in-game assets. So, for example, like we had one of these wall sections kind of built out, and then use that as kind of like a starting point to then go and like build additional wall shapes off of that. So again, it's kind of being able to take what we have and then flesh that out and then turn that into like a fully realized location.
Okay, so if you don't mind, I would like to stay a bit more in this on this fortress city or whatever.
Sure.
And guys, I mean, if you guys don't like what I'm doing now, trying to do breakdown of Ken's visual here, please let me know. We can move forward, and also I'm reading your questions as well, so I'm just trying to implement them into question, like two or three of them into the questions that I ask Ken. So, okay, obviously this is like because it has also like a lot of architecture and so on. This may be the perfect example, like why it's so beneficial to use 3D. I mean, it really speeds up your work a lot. So here we have the walls, of course. On some places we have like groups, repetitive groups. Like for example, walls have this kind of sticks sticking out or whatever it is, and then we have this circular shapes with a lot of how do I call this, repetitive stuff, like in a circular fashion, and also we have like also another group which are these small boxy buildings here, and if I'm not mistaken, like this tallest element is actually the same thing that you have in another illustration, in another piece of concept art, which shows like a street level. So like when doing like for those who are, because I see like a lot of them here are like questioning if 3D is needed. So what happens here? So you're using some kind of modifiers, like array modifiers, maybe instancing, like, or I don't know how this works in 3ds Max, but I assume it's kind of, it can be either some kind of particle system, or like instancing the same object, or like few objects, and then like moving them around to get a perfect balance. So can you talk a bit about that, because I'm kind of interested, like I'm interested in how, like when you're already using 3D to make things faster, but how do you make them in while using 3D? How do you make them even more faster with the tricks that you can use in your software?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like you're absolutely right. Like a lot of the repetitive stuff, also just things that require just a lot of individual shapes and repeated details. Like the tools in 3D software just really help that process exponentially. One thing, though, I will say as a caveat that I think it's really important, and this is something that I used to tell my students when I was teaching as much as possible, is to not let the tool itself dictate what the design is. And what I mean by that is, and I see this a lot in a lot of like student work and or beginner like portfolios, is a specific tool that is native to a certain modeling software or something like that ends up actually influencing the design itself, and that's not necessarily always a bad thing, right? But when you have a design that relies on one kind of tool, right, it starts to look as though the design wasn't thought out with intention, and instead is here, let me give you an example.
You mean like it looks like, maybe it looks like it was more inspired by the tool functionality.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was going to use an example as like, when a new tool is kind of discovered, like array, right, for example, and then all of a sudden this design in this image has all these things arrayed, like duplicated, arrayed around it, and instead of actually having a design in mind and then using the tool to achieve it, the tool kind of dictates what it is.
It takes over the design.
Yeah, so that's an important thing to keep in mind for sure. But
sometimes it may be hard to control yourself when it's something like really cool, like some really cool function.
Oh, totally. That's why I said like it's not necessarily always a bad thing, right? But I think when you are tasked with coming up with a design that is really well thought out and planned and intentional, it's definitely something to keep in mind. But anyways,
I guess the art director is here to correct you in those situations and say, I see you've been playing a lot today, so let's just cut some things out of this composition. Okay.
But so in this case though, a lot of it, like for example, like if I was painting this strictly in 2D, duplicating all of these like fortifications, these like kind of spikes that stick out, it would just be such a pain, and it would be so tedious, and it's for something that's not necessarily super important for the composition, but it is an important detail for fleshing out like the design. It's just so much easier to be able to duplicate something along an axis and and not have to worry about the perspective being correct. And the same goes for like duplicating these repeated shapes here. But you brought up a good point. So this tower actually it's not actually the same as some of those others that you mentioned. And that was intentional. So this is actually not the same location as, for example, this. So this is actually a different settlement, but it's utilizing the same architectural shape language because they're made by the same people. But this is actually like the precursor. So this is like the first settlement. And spoilers for anyone, in the cinematic, the city is destroyed. So it was kind of meant to show like the progression of people moving on and rebuilding, right? Not that this other location was built after, but just to show that these people, the only place where these people are like settling. Like there's multiple like locations that are all built around the same design aesthetics and maybe the same culture and the same like just I guess like shape language, right? But having the 3D tools is really helpful in that I can take this shape, right, that already existed, that was already modeled out, and I can go and I can do like really intricate and really specific operations on that shape to create something new. So I did actually use that piece as a starting point, but then I was able to then tweak that shape using modifiers in 3ds Max to get kind of like an interesting twist to it, to show that these things are related, are made by the same people, but this is a slightly different location.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's like so. Let me try to rephrase it in my head. So okay, so are you limit? I mean, I'm a lot of in a 3D, and it's like a rabbit hole, There are it's much different than painting, because like when you're painting, when you're drawing, you're kind of limited to your skills, of what you can do, and like when you're in a 3D environment, you can do so many things without even knowing what you're doing, So, did you do limit yourself with the tools that you're using? Like, are you like a kind of person who says like, okay, I'll just learn how to, box model, extrude stuff and use like some of the modifiers that I know that I need?
Absolutely.
You're that kind of a person.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Learned. So whenever I'm learning a new program, I learn the absolute bare minimum.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's good to control yourself,
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think also it helps mitigate some of the stress for learning a new program. Like especially like, look at like 3D Coat or ZBrush. Like the first time you open up those programs, it's super intimidating.
You just close them.
Yeah, you have no idea what's going on, right? And for me, I'm super impatient. I want to get right into making stuff. So I typically will focus on just learning the bare minimum, super basics, and just focus on getting really comfortable with those.
But with the concept art, it's really, I mean, just to be able to, like, if we only talk about putting things into perspective, literally into perspective, it can help so much, just so you're not bothered with drawing, vanishing points and everything in between, and back and forth and setting the perspective and then painting in all the elements. It helps so much just to block them out and, like do the frame, make the shot and then start painting over it, right?
Yep. Yeah. I think, let me see here. Like, I really do not consider myself a good modeler by any means whatsoever. I've just gotten really comfortable with the basic tools that allow me to get to where I need to go. So like, when it comes to like poly modeling and hard surface modeling, like I definitely do not consider myself to be very well versed with that. But I feel like if you have a really good understanding of those basics, like for example in 3ds Max, I rarely get into a lot of the technical side of Max and like modifiers and stuff. There's really maybe 4 or 5 modifiers I use, and even with modeling, I rarely will get into sub D modeling. I'll almost always stick with low poly box modeling. And stick with just primitives. And when you actually look at stuff, like if, for example, if you look at this shape, like it's really just made up of a combination of a bunch of primitives.
Yeah.
And when you kind of think about it like that, it seems a lot less daunting, because I think when people see this, for example, they're like, oh wow, that looks like a lot of stuff to model out. But
It's more like
Again,
here's more like breaking stuff, like big forms.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. It's just and that's kind of what I mean when I say like, oh, I focus on treating it like as if it was a sketch, because if you get too carried away or bogged down by like the technical side of the tools, you start to lose sense of like what's important in your scene. For I'll even call myself out here. Like for example, like I'll zoom in here and say like the way these objects kind of crash together is super ugly, right? It's just not great, right? And even some of this stuff is it's not very clean, right? But ultimately, what my job is not to model out production models. It's to focus on the big picture design. Like what are the elements that make up what's going to be on screen in front of the player or the viewer, right? And not get focused on that stuff, and really just stay in line with just what's
this
important.
This is something that actually I think like when we're talking about rabbit holes and that kind of stuff. So I can talk from my experience. So like I I did a lot of mistakes by treating concept art pieces like in a 3D environment as a 3D models for production, you know.
Mhm.
And what's good here is that you actually, from my perspective, and this is why I think concept artists that do like this kind of environments should have like more of a reverse engineering process of using 3D in a sense. You know, you block out big shapes and then you break them, you know, like into plates, into smaller elements, and they don't necessarily have to be perfect, because this is what will make them sketchy, the imperfections that you implement into composition. So it's really good to be like like bad at modeling in a way, you know, to get all these details that you can, you know, easily fix if needed when painting over, or even use, you know, for the design, you know. So because like when you see like game ready models or the okay, let's say if, for films models are more details and so on, but like when you see like game ready models without textures, you know, they just look too clean, you know. And but when you're using like 3D software, the way you're using it, like where you just like use big forms and they break it into pieces and then like do like some tiny little movements, get some artifacts there. Actually, you know, when you paint it over, it looks good. Like okay, like for example, this here already this looks like more of a like a perfect 3D model, you know, that you would see maybe prepared already for the game. But this clay renders that you've shown, like of this academy thing place, you know, like already I can see, you know, how this model can motivate you, you know, to, you know, use all these imperfections to do something amazing that you did later on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also when you hand that off to someone else, or it allows a certain amount of interpretation, even if it's like really, really minor. Like it's, you know, there's different people on the project are going to interpret that differently. And if you're on a team full of like super talented people, which I'm really fortunate to be on, everyone will bring something new to the design. And as long as everyone is aligned with what the intention of that design is, every time that gets handed off to another artist, that the quality should increase, right? The overall quality of that design should always take a step up when that touches someone else's hands. And I think having a certain amount of the design be somewhat open to interpretation, I do think is a benefit, is a good thing. On the other hand, though, I do think the distinction has to be made, though, between room for interpretation and things that are implied details, and things that maybe just visually don't make sense, right? Because sometimes concepts will be done in a way that's like quote unquote like loose and is you know, implied detail. but maybe some of those shapes three-dimensionally just don't work, right? They kind of create that MC Escher effect, where from a certain angle, yes, they might make sense, but as soon as you rotate that three-dimensionally and spatially, those things just fall apart. So it's striking that balance between finding stuff that the shapes make sense and someone can interpret it correctly, without leaving too much, I guess, to the imagination, because that's when the design can kind of fall apart a little bit.
Can you enlighten us a bit about this is my last question about this fortified city. So then you can move on with whatever you have planned.
Sure.
So what was the direction? What was the brief? Uh, with the tasks that you had to do, like, and how time did you spend on like collecting references, and then uh, later on how much time did you, like, when we combine, like how much time was like in 3D and how much time was in 2D?
Mm-hmm.
How I mean, what was the workflow there? Okay, so
Sure. Yeah. So the workflow is it's rarely a constant thing. I think that changes on a task by task basis, but I'll kind of walk through like what this was. So the kind of just basic high level brief was essentially to kind of go over the story beats for this cinematic. And what was the overall tone emotionally and in the at that place in the overarching narrative, right? So at this point, what is the player supposed to be feeling, right? What is what are the key takeaways that we're trying to communicate to the player, right? In this case, it's the history. It's essentially, it was like kind of a history lesson on what happened at this city that led to its ultimate demise, right? So it all starts with that, right? And almost every time, and this is something again that I'm a really big advocate for, is before actually putting my Wacom to the screen or a pen to paper to start sketching or anything like that, I always start with just key descriptive words, right? So I start to write down and actually take notes for myself and start to think of and kind of make kind of like a brainstorm map with my associations and connections made with that brief, right? So a city that is supposed to represent the last bastion of hope of mankind, and a impending sense of dread and doom that is going to befall this city, right? So immediately start to kind of make a map of, okay, well, what are the things that I associate with those emotions and with those that tone? What are some of the tools I can have at my disposal to then use to help communicate those things? Because I find that if you start that basic, right off the bat, you've already kind of narrowed down a lot of your design exploration. You already kind of know, you essentially are planning out your ingredients. And, for example, in this one, the ingredients are, a moody, golden hour lighting with very elegant and simple architecture with, sinister looking hooded figures in the foreground, right? Like, so there's so many different ways you can map out your composition from that point. But once you have those things like in place and you know exactly what your ingredients are, I guess, to put together, it makes approaching something like this that can seem very open-ended and innocuous, like just feel a lot more fleshed out, and like immediately you have a direction. Because I do find that, after getting a brief, it's very easy to kind of get overwhelmed and start looking for reference. And, that process of finding the design can sometimes just be a little bit, I guess, tedious and slow to get started. So I always find that starting with like just those descriptive words and what is the narrative that I'm trying to get across, and starting with just the story, and then kind of going to sketching is typically my process. So when it comes to the 3D modeling, again, I'll reiterate this because it really is different on a task by task basis. But typically for things that are for cinematics or like key narrative, plot points, there's a little bit of emphasis and importance placed on those. So typically there'll be a little bit more time available to spend on fleshing those out. So, for example, a design like this, where it's very general, it's not really specific to any actual in-world location, and it's more about establishing a mood, are typically go much faster, right? Whereas this something like this can be done in a few hours. Whereas if it's something that is, it again has much more importance to a very specific narrative or story beats, there is more importance there. So therefore, typically there's an allowance to spend more time on figuring those things out. It's not always the case because, obviously in a production setting, there's always, the wild card and stuff like that. You never know how things are going to go, but typically that's the case. So for this case, I believe from start to finish, and this was with other iterations on this handful of images, I think was a week. So from like essentially Monday to Friday, I had to come up with a couple of different iterations. So for example, this is actually a later iteration, and this is closer to what we settled on in the actual game. As well as the supporting images. For example, where was it again? This one, I think was about a week. Was Monday through Friday working on it, and then kind of sending off that package of images in an email to the team that it's going to be kind of taking it from there. Another example of something like that would be this location from Mass Effect Andromeda. So this was this is supposed to be kind of like the final moment, the final encounter of the game, right? So it's a very important, story beat and an important, memorable moment, that we want players to kind of, really, really remember and have a standout experience. So typically something like this, again, there'll be a little bit more time spent on fleshing out and going through iteration. And in a lot of cases, that doesn't necessarily equate to more time spent on the actual design or that one image, and instead it means spending more time on exploring first before settling on a final image. So, it really depends.
Is it hard to? I mean, I'm looking at all these shapes and looking works of other artists who are or were working on similar projects that you've been working so far, and it's like, is it sometimes hard, to find something that will still be original and fresh with all these abstractions going on all over the art station and everywhere? Like, it's really hard to find something new, I guess, when it comes to like this iconic scenes, and all the shapes used in it.
Yeah, no, that is a really big challenge. Like everything is kind of a remix these days. I do find though that it's beneficial to not look at too much concept art as reference, right? I mean, it's my daily routine to go on ArtStation and see what's new up on ArtStation. That's my go-to. Like I love browsing through ArtStation and looking at all the awesome stuff that like my friends and other artists I look up to are doing. But when it comes to actually like working on a design, like I try not to use any of that stuff as reference, because I think anyone can attest to this. It just, even if you try super hard not to, it just finds its way into the design. It just kind of seeps its way in, and even if you're just having it off on your second monitor, it just finds its way in. And again, that's not necessarily always a bad thing, right? Because there's so much just cool stuff that's out there. But I think the important thing on the individual artist level to really keep in mind and think about when it comes to trying to put your own take on something or trying to make something unique is to try and pull from your own personal experience and your own mental library, your own visual library. And I think those are the things that are always going to have a certain level of uniqueness to it, right? No two people's like experience in life or the way they interpret certain things are going to be the same. So, relying on your own personal experience and your own beliefs or your own affinities and tastes and stuff like that, to kind of imprint in your designs, like letting as much of that in as possible, I think is really good because, yeah, again, you may have experienced something as a child where, like, say, for example, maybe you visited a certain country and there was a very distinct memory that you have of the way, not just the way it looked, but the way it felt to stand there and the way, like, it smelled and the way the food tasted or the way people acted. And that experience is unique to you, right? So trying to rely on those things to incorporate into your designs is really important. And it goes in a somewhat abstract direction when you start to think about it's not just the visual like library that you're kind of tapping into and like those memories and stuff like that from those personal experiences that you can tap into, but it's the idea of painting a feeling, right? Or designing a feeling. It's not necessarily always about like, oh, that's how I remember something seeing, or that's a specific style that architectural style that I want to reference, and that's how I remember it and that's how I interpreted it. But it's also like, man, I remember being out in the ocean on a boat when I was younger, fishing with my family, and just the way the atmosphere felt of how thick and humid it was, and that feeling that I had. How do I paint that feeling, right? And incorporate that into the painting, right? So I think that's also another level of how you can draw from your own personal experience. And I think those are the things that kind of really dictate what your style is, because this is another thing I really enjoyed talking about with my past students. But there's a lot of pressure around finding your style, right? And finding what is your style, what is it that I can create that is unique to only me. And I kind of think it's actually detrimental to focus so much on having your own unique style.
Does it even matter for a concept artist?
Yeah, totally. I mean, essentially, that's what it's all about. Because if you try to come up with a style, or you try to like mimic a style and then kind of give it your own twist, it inherently is. Let me see. I don't want to use like a judgmental word, because it's not disingenuous. It's not like dishonest, but there's something that is just not true to you, right? And I wouldn't say all the time, but a lot of times that does come through in the artwork when you try to like really force a style, or you really try to like put it in when it doesn't come out naturally. I think, from my own personal opinion, it does come through, and I think it's more important for people to focus on just making a lot of work and making work that has those things that I was talking about, like their own their own interpretation and draws from their own experiences, because I find that when it's done that way, the style comes out on its own. Right? And then that's much more genuine, and that's much more indicative of who that person is as a designer and as an artist.
Two short questions, and then I think we'll move a bit to VR, unless you wanna add something more in between. But so let's see this. That's a question from the crowd. Mr. Mendoza or Mrs. Mendoza, Mr. Mendoza, Edsel, I guess it's the guy. So, what's the expected deadlines for junior artists when making portfolio pieces? Should I focus on speed or quality?
I personally think that quality is better because if ultimately the final product that is delivered is just really high quality, um, if a little bit more time was spent on it, it's easier for that to be forgiven, I guess. Um, and I think also if you focus on quality first, I think you're focusing more on truly like what's most important when it comes to designing things. I think with practice you could always get faster. So I mean, yes, working in concept art in the industry like is super important to be fast, but I still do think it is slightly secondary to just having good quality work. Um, that being said, like you can have work that is like I've seen this with plenty of working professionals where like their work is maybe a lot looser and sketchier, but the ideas are phenomenal. There's just such good ideas and such original and like new and exciting ideas that the quality of the work maybe like in regards to like the pictorial quality of it is maybe slightly less, but the idea is just is great. So it kind of balances itself out. So I guess an easy way to say it is if you're going to be working slow, make sure you're really good. If you're really, really good, like, or like, if you're, not maybe amazing, make sure you're really, really fast. So like you're able to, I guess, like balance those out. But when practicing and working on a portfolio, I would definitely put emphasis on just overall visual quality.
The other question is related to motivation at work, and you know, I guess like everyone has this dark moments, where when you kind of don't feel like doing anything, uh, and this might be related to like a type of work that you're doing, but also I guess sometimes like the real life affects us, and it's just not our day or our week, so which can be a bit of a problem when you're working like in a team, and it is expected from you to deliver,
Hmm.
so like what's your solution in those situations, or are you just waiting for them to go away, or
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question, and that's something I actually, I do have a lot of experience with having to find that balance. It is very easy to get burned out. And I think just the amount of passion and dedication it takes to maintain a really high level of work. So this is outside of even just talking about like work hours or specific projects. I think just our profession as like and just being a creative person inherently um, can burn you out, right? Because um, I think there's this idea of when you're a creative person or when you're an artist, you kind of have to always be on. You always have to be in artist mode and in student mode and always trying to be like learning new things. And it's really tiring and it can really easily burn you out. But, I think to a certain extent, there is no real like magic answer to that because ultimately we're all human and it is unavoidable and it is human to feel tired or low on energy or burnt out sometimes. Um, I don't necessarily think that that is just in like, inherent to the games or film industry. I think, all people are subject to, you know, to having, mood swings or going through areas where it's difficult to be motivated and stuff. Um, but I do think there's a few things that can help. So being a part of a team that is not toxic, a team that is supportive, that you get along well with, can go really, really such a long way. Because these are like-minded people that are likely going through similar things as you, and they can provide input that can be really helpful with kind of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, I guess you could say. Um, but I think also sometimes just trying to focus on what's in front of you. I think with this profession, it's really easy to get overwhelmed with all of these different things that need to align for something to work. And that's something that I used to get really stressed out about all this stuff that is out of my control. And, especially as creative people, again, I've mentioned this before, we're typically very perfectionistic, right? And we want to have that control over things. And I think it's really good to try and let go of that to a certain extent, and really just focus on what's in front of you, because regardless of if it's working in film or in games, at the end of the day, there's not really a whole lot that you do have control over unless you're in like a leadership position, right? So ultimately the only thing you do have control over are the things that are right in front of you, right? And when you focus on just thinking about the task at hand and what is it that I'm going to be working on for the next 10 minutes, and taking it in small chunks like that, and think about, okay, what is it I'm trying to do right now, right in front of me, and nothing else. And I think breaking it down into really simple, easy things to manage like that really does help. I think also on a more granular level, when it comes to actually making concept art is also like super stressful, right? Because, as concept artists, you're kind of like the first line of defense, right? You're like the first person to have any kind of input aside from the art director and their vision, right? Or the production designer. You're the first person to really put their thumbprint on something. But after that, there's going to be 10s, 20, 30, maybe 100 people afterwards who are going to be
dissecting your work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of pressure. So I think, again, just focusing on what's in front of you and focusing on what your task is really helpful. But again, sorry, I tend to go off on tangents a lot. But when it comes to like on the granular level of actually making concept art, I think it's really important to just focus on, what is it that I'm trying to achieve? And that's another reason why I always like to start off on just taking notes and having a list of just descriptive words, because then I have like a really simple thing that I can just go back to and just remind myself, oh yeah, there's all this stuff I'm trying to balance and integrate and all these ideas I want to get in. Let me just go back to that list and see, like, at its most basic form, what is it that I'm trying to do? And just really try to stay as much as you can focused on that. Is really just going to be very beneficial. But yeah, you know what? It definitely is a stressful, high stakes profession. So, and anytime there is the human element involved, right? There is a certain amount of unpredictability that comes with it, and your mood and stuff like that, or stuff that might be affecting you outside of work, again, is stuff it's hard to control. So I think there isn't like a one-stop answer to that, but yeah, definitely something I think we can all kind of relate to.
Okay, let's go back and talk a bit about tools or artists' weapons.
Let's do it.
So now, like in recent 10 years, maybe like a lot of things have a lot of new things came, like software solutions inside software. But like when you actually check like the best works in artist portfolios like 10 years ago and now, I mean, you can see this difference in maybe like how the I don't know, like cloth looks, because in the meantime we had like, I don't know, something like Marvelous Designer, which really helped a lot, to make believable cloth and that kind of stuff. But like the quality of work, I mean, I want to say like this technology didn't affect the quality of work, like that much, because still, if you go like 10 years back, 15 years back, I'm just talking about like about CG artists. You can still find like extraordinary examples of work. It's just that now we have like more such examples, and but when we talk about technology, there were some moments in recent like 20, 30 years that have really changed the way things are a lot. So for guys who are doing characters, I guess this would be uh, like the software like ZBrush, that appeared, which literally changed the way, like changed the way that characters are produced, because of all the back then all the organic tools that were available to artists, and so on. And now, then also we talked about like one hour before, like we talked about how 3D has changed the way that concept artists work, which back then were maybe more focused on using like 90% of cases like using 2D tools like Photoshop, and then you have this 3D thing, which really helps like with the perspective, and this really affects the quality of work because it looks more believable. But then we have this VR thing going on now with all these tools like Medium, like what's the name of the sketch? No, what's the name of the
Gravity Sketch.
Gravity Sketch. Then we also had like Google Sketch or something of the sort. And this, I still haven't. Okay. During one of our events, Jama Jurabayev, he gave me his like VR set because he was giving the workshop here in Zagreb with VR tools. So he gave me the opportunity to try it. It was like 2 years ago, and to be honest, I was really clumsy with it, because I didn't know how to like even define like where will I put the object, start painting or modeling. But but what I wanted to say, I see these VR tools. They may not affect the quality that much, but the speed of like doing ideations and like making you faster. So I don't think that you can't do like in ZBrush stuff that you can do like in Medium, but it looks like it's giving you like totally different perspective of the thing that you're building, and especially when you're doing like architecture, but also characters. So, can you like correct me if I'm totally wrong there, or like what's the deal with VR and the tools that you've been using for the Anthem, as we have seen in your portfolio?
Yeah, totally. No, I agree with all that. It's really interesting just how much things change and how quickly things change, and kind of paying attention to like the styles of art, but also just the overall quality of art being made over the years. But it's a nice segue though that you brought up VR, because as of maybe a little bit more than a year ago, I started to really get into using VR and introducing that into my workflow. And yeah, I guess I'll just talk a little bit about what I think about like VR and how like some of the benefits I think about it, and some of the things that stand out to me as something like going forward that I think is going to be super useful, and also just my experience using it. But on previous projects, like so for example, the work that I do in a production setting, like at work, I don't use any VR stuff for that, and the reason for that is because I pretty much predominantly do environment work, and while I do actually in my free time do use VR for some environment design stuff, I do find that it really shines when it comes to character stuff and creatures and things that I think are easy to like manage and communicate at like the human scale, like at like you know. Um, I will say though, sculpting VR, like architecture in VR, one of the really awesome things about it is being able to just zoom in with a couple of strokes of your arm, and now all of a sudden the environment that you were just sculpting is the actual size and scale that it's intended to be. So now you can interact with that design in a way that is much closer to the way the viewer or the player will interact with it. And that's one of the coolest things that I like about VR is I always think it's just really important to be able to design your environments or your characters, whatever, in a similar context as it will be viewed, right? So if you're designing an environment for a game that is going to be viewed from the first person, right? Um, Being able to like in VR actually scale up that environment and make sure that that design holds up at that perspective and actually traverse through that space from that scale is just something that you wouldn't have been able to do like even in traditional 3D modeling software. I mean, you could always set up a camera and stuff like that, but until you're actually able to look around and that space is like tangible, um, there's a certain element of interaction with that you're kind of missing out on. And whenever there's that translation from something from 2D to 3D, there is always room for things to maybe not translate as well from one to the other as possible. I said this earlier, but it's a constant back and forth when designing environments for games, especially because a design in 2D might look awesome as like a single image, right? But then, as like just an example, as a third-person perspective game, the scale and the perspective of that just might not work that well, right? So it makes sense to be able to design those things contextually similar to how those will be interacted with, to really just like help mitigate some of that potential disconnect. So the thing that got me into utilizing VR, so the reason I pulled this up, this is a model that I actually did sculpt in Oculus Medium. I just have this set up in Keyshot, which is where I do most of my rendering. The reason what got me into it is ever since I got into modeling, I've always felt that there's this kind of like I guess like coldness and disconnect from like my hand and what I want to design and what I'm actually capable of doing in real time. And it's kind of going back to what I was saying before, like 3D modeling just inherently just does not feel as organic and as spontaneous as sketching or drawing. So as soon as I started using 3D modeling, I've always wished for there to be some way of working in 3D that felt more tactile and more spontaneous and organic. And the closest thing I had found was ZBrush and 3D Code, right? Because it was much closer to sculpting and stuff like that. But even still, I felt as though it didn't feel like I was sketching, right? And it's kind of somewhat hard to explain, like using VR to someone that's never used it. The best way really is to just try it. But I remember the first time I used Oculus Medium, which again was maybe only a year ago. And I recall it being the same feeling I got when the first time I picked up a pen tablet and I had Photoshop in front of me. And it was like this feeling of like, I don't know, it was a very enchanting feeling where like I immediately fell in love with it. And I haven't had that feeling since that first time I picked up a pen tablet. And I remember, being in like freshman year of college when that happened, I became obsessed. I remember that moment when I brought home my laptop and my new Wacom tablet.
like I was immediately obsessed. And I think for like 3 or 4 days after, like all day for like 3 or 4 days straight, I just spent painting in Photoshop. And opening up Oculus Medium, it was the first time I had felt that since that time. So like I immediately knew this was something really special and something like that I knew that I was going to be like utilizing a lot from this point on. And it's pretty much been the case. When it comes to personal work, I will almost always, there will be some process of it that is involved with VR. And it comes down to, again, just how organic and tactile it feels. Again, I can try to explain it, but it's very difficult to explain until you've actually tried it. But the three-dimensionality of how you manipulate shapes, it really does feel like you're drawing on with a pencil on paper. It really does feel that intuitive. Again, I've never really considered myself to be great at modeling or sculpting. I've always loved drawing, right? I've always loved sketching, and I've always loved sketching robots. And I've always found that the type of robots that I like to sketch and stuff like that, I always had a hard time going in and modeling them and trying to make like a nice 3D render from them. And I think it was because the way I like to sketch robots is just very organic and just not like box modeling at all. And again, I'm not very well versed at box modeling. So once I found this way of being able to create 3D like objects that were similar to the way that I sketched, and not only that, I even started to find that a lot of my kind of muscle memory things that I had gotten used to the way that I sketched started to come through in the way that I was sculpting in Medium. Like I just fell even further like in love with it. I think just the ability also to just scale something up and like stand next to your design, it just adds this like, I don't know, this like sense of believability to it when you're designing it. Like they just feel like tangible like things that are actually existing in front of you.
And you really do get this feeling in VR space.
Yeah, you really do. Again, it's hard to explain, but it's really an incredible experience. Like, I'm not trying to like be like an evangelist and say like, oh, it's gonna change your life, you know. But like, it really is so much fun. And for me, like, being able to
we know Oculus is paying you.
Oh man, I wish. Oh, that'd be awesome. Like just anything that comes like close to tapping into like that. It sounds super cheesy when I'm just gonna say it, but like that sense of like magic, where like, oh my god, this feels so incredible, and now all I want to do is just work in it. Again, the only other time I've ever felt that was when I picked up Photoshop and a tablet for the first time. So yeah, I'm pretty in love with it as far as I'm concerned. I think also now we're getting to the point where it's no longer like has that gimmick like around it. I feel like maybe like a year ago or even less, when it started to really increase in popularity amongst concept artists, I think that there was still a sense from a lot of people that it was a fad and it was going to kind of, you know, it was going to go away and no one was actually going to use it in a production setting.
But they invested so much money in advertising it, so I even think that like all these companies kind of hooked up together and said like, okay, we'll invest like billions in advertising just to make this, you know, work, you know. But I'm still not sure how it works for the users that they are after, you know, and that's like people who, you know, like should be probably playing games and watching TV programs through these VR goggles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it is a very like split audience, right? But yeah, no, I think like recently though, it's gotten over, I think, that initial awkwardness, you know, where the programs and the apps that were created were still like kind of in their infancy. And I think, you know, for example, Gravity Sketch and Oculus Medium, have gotten significant updates since they came out.
You mean
And
in terms of usability, or
yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, like that, like going back and talking about that first time I used Oculus Medium, it wasn't that long ago, but there was a lot of tools that are built in now that when, even a year ago, weren't there. So they have been supporting the app really well, and also like just updating it in a way that's just making every update the app becomes exponentially more powerful and capable of doing more things
I
and stuff like
remember that
that.
the setup was a bit tedious, like of the software and then the hardware, and then like because like last year at the event we had like one artist and we were setting up the machine for him. So it took a while, to
Yeah,
install
yeah.
things, to drivers and that kind of stuff. So this wasn't very motivating for me, as a person who like wanted to like to get the set,
Yep.
so but yeah, I mean,
Yeah, it was a little clumsy. I
yeah,
think now though, I think it's definitely gotten over a lot of that awkwardness.
but there are also like new technologies like for hardware as well. I see Samsung like Magic Leap and that kind of stuff, uh, Magic Leap, uh, like goggles are getting smaller,
Hmm.
and also now you can even not probably for the Oculus, but I see some companies are like developing goggles which you can we can like actually place see models like in your real environment.
Oh, the augmented reality.
Yeah, but
Yes.
now you can do it through the goggles, not like watching your mobile, and then with a camera, you can literally see through goggles and see the like the model that you're interacting with, in your room, and that kind of stuff. So, but anyway, let's read the then we go back to the VR. Let's read Bjorn's question. Bjorn Hur is here, another fantastic artist. Actually, I always like to say this. Uh, Bjorn is actually a guy who, even before we met, he got me interested into world of concept art, because I watched an interview of his where he was working in a studio in London. Anyways, he says, "Is there a moment in your career that you recall as a pivotal artistic moment for you?"
Oh, that's a really good question. I think it was the most pivotal was probably that initial one that I had mentioned when I got my first job, and I kind of just got I think just kind of thrown into the deep end of just um, like working with people that were just super super talented, and that like being surrounded by like just incredibly talented and driven and passionate people. When you're working remotely, like you don't really get that because you're working by yourself and stuff like that. But when you're surrounded by other really creative and like really talented people, like it's contagious, and it just makes you want to be better. So that was kind of the first time I ever experienced like that drive to just constantly try to be better and create better work. um, I think also working on my most recent project on Anthem was probably the second most pivotal, I would say, in terms of like my professional experience. And that was because that was the first time I got to work on a project with artists that I had looked up to for a long time, which was really stressful because these are people who I really admired their work for a while, and then being able to work on this project with them was just like it's just one of those things where like when you meet the right people, you just kind of want to be around with them, and you just want to talk to them as much as possible because like they're so knowledgeable that like you could be talking to them about like what kind of fast food you like, and like you feel as though you're going to learn something from them. It sounds really cheesy, but Yeah, I think working on this project is probably the most I've learned in the shortest amount of time, and it's just because of the awesome people I get to work with every day.
Cool. Let's go back to the VR.
Oh, so yeah, in the background, I opened up this model here in Keyshot just to show an example of some architecture that is done in VR. Because yeah, I think a lot of the stuff that people show is more again like characters and creatures. But you know, you can do some really cool, really simple like architectural sketches too.
So what I noticed, okay, looks like VR is based on. I mean, VR. I'm talking about the medium, of course. The sculpts are done in like kind of voxel technology.
Yeah.
So then you have to export it as a mesh, you know, and I see like then it's probably depends a lot on the resolution. Can you set the resolution inside the medium, or it's like default resolution?
Yep. Yeah. It's very similar actually to 3D Coat that also utilizes voxels. So yeah, you can set the resolution. You do have to be mindful that that is going to have an
Yeah, of
impact
course.
on performance. But yeah, it's I would say working with Medium. That's predominantly the tool I use
Uh-huh.
in VR. Going back and forth from other programs is very easy, and that's one of the things that they've actually focused on updating somewhat recently is that you know being able to import and export things is very seamless and very intuitive.
Are there
Um,
any connection with a certain programs like 3D Code because it's using almost the same technology?
I don't believe so. No. But I will say though, exporting stuff is very, very easy. One of the really cool things about this, you saw it in the previous VR, like the robots that I had up, is the textures. Those are all painted directly in Medium, and when you export, it automatically generates UVs, so
Oh,
you don't have
really?
to worry about that. Yep, it exports it, and then you can reapply those materials seamlessly. You know, you just have to be mindful that it's not going to be unwrapped in a way that you can
Of course.
make sense of it.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. It's automatic. But then you can transfer these colors to the proper UV if needed.
yep.
So
Yeah, exactly. And in most cases, if you're going to be just throwing it into render and Octane or Keyshot, you probably won't have to do that anyways, because a lot of times you just throw stuff in. A lot of the materials and shaders are all procedural anyways. So I find myself rarely having to do any UV work, which is nice because I don't know of anyone that loves doing UVs.
I love.
Oh wow, you're the first person I know.
But
It's
okay,
like
okay, but not maybe. I love doing UVs on my own models, of course.
okay, yeah,
So, anyways, I see like this mesh. It you know like lacks some like sharpness on some edges maybe
yep,
where they should be sharp. But then again, this is like a perfect base for like when you get a like perfect angle for the clay render, then you can do really a lot in Photoshop with this because
yeah.
you see everything where like it's really easy now to sharpen all the places where light hits and the shadow and meets the shadow and that stuff.
Yeah, this is actually a perfect example of how I use VR for iteration and for sketching. So this is by no means like a finished, like presentable, like portfolio model. But what this is great for is, and it's kind of replaced this process for me when working on personal stuff at home. But the process of just sketching out thumbnails. I previously would do that almost entirely either on like with pen and paper or in Photoshop, and now I can do the exact same process in the same amount of time, except now I'm left with a three-dimensional object. So these are very much just sketches. So this was done in maybe like 20 minutes. So the great thing is in a professional setting, it's a production setting, I could fill an entire page of thumbnails, like this. That function is just that. They're just exploratory sketches. But now, instead of just a drawing or a sketch that's focusing on silhouette or line, and a page full of variations of those, I now have like fully three-dimensional objects. So for example, if one of those gets approved and we want to move forward on that, I just go right back to my 3D, and then I have something I can either add more detail to and tighten up, or I can just bring this right into Photoshop, as Marco was saying, and just easily clean up those lines. Because that's the thing is, yes, the details are soft, but again, it's one of those things where I'm constantly evaluating, do I care? Is that going to be something that is going to make those sharper in here? It's going to add more resolution, so it's going to slow down the program a little bit if I really want to do that in Medium. But also, like, it's not super important at that stage, right? So once I bring this into Photoshop, if I wanted to go and sharpen these edges, I could do a pass on this and take maybe 10, 15 minutes and take care of that. And so it's not something that I find that hinders the process or at all. So, but I most of the time don't use Medium for like final concept models or blockouts. I'll almost always use it for stuff like this.
So this is we could call this like an exploration phase.
Exactly. That's what I think VR really shines at is exploration for sketching. Except you are left with then a fully realized 3D object instead of, you know, just something on paper.
So
that
like to sum it up, like I mean, VR wise, it's the greatest benefit here is actually the ability to be like in this kind of almost real life correlation with the object that you're doing. So this, because it gives you much better perspective of what you're building either around you or in front of you. So and then again, this is what and if we go back to the question that I asked you like now almost 2 hours ago, the believability, you know, sorry for my English, you know, when doing something maybe of a larger scale, probably when you're in front of this object, it's much easier to see, you know, if it's believable or not. So, yeah, I mean, I really like, I mean, there is this kind of wall that you have to go over, and that's, you know, getting the VR set, adapting yourself, you know, to, you know, learning the basics, you know, and I guess it would be cool to have someone near you who has already this experience to help you out a bit, because I think that it's not so easy to follow tutorials on VR as it is to follow tutorials on like you know, like software that we usually use. But even that is getting better and better, because now you have like all this possibility of you know, recording of what you're doing inside VR environment. So yeah, I see like Bjorn has a question. Yeah, it's along the lines of what I asked. Like, in how long do you think there will be a specific role of VR artist in the industry, if at all?
I don't think, I don't know. It's hard to tell again, because like how quick things change, and you know, I don't know for sure, but I can see more so VR becoming just another standard tool, where like you had mentioned, Marco, in the beginning, like the use of 3D in concept art has become very commonplace, to the point where now you don't really have to specify like, oh yeah, I did this in 3D. It's just kind of like it's no longer, I think, something that is a standout workflow. It's not something that is really you know, groundbreaking, I think. And I think VR will become like that too. I think in the next few years, VR will become just another way to make art, and it will no longer be like something that is like has this sense of I think like a gimmick around it, and I think it'll be something that is just accepted as part of the way concept artists work.
But not just concept art. I see like I mean apps like Quill for animating things in VR.
Yeah,
some,
absolutely.
Like,
yeah, you're right.
Some amazing results by like Goro Fujita and other guys who
Oh
are
yeah.
posting it like in Quill group. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah, that's true. For other disciplines as well, I think there's also, there's a app for rigging in VR.
oh really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I actually was talking to some coworkers like months ago about the idea of this, but I find it really exciting the implication of VR in the production setting uh, in games and in film, right? So I think in games especially, like the idea of being able to stand inside of an environment. So like here, let me back up and make and create like an example. Right. So let's just say, for example, you're in like an art review meeting and you and your art director are going to go through and fly through a level and like give feedback on it. Right. There's something I find really interesting about the prospect of being able to like actually stand inside that level and walk through it together and like point to specific things
Hmm.
in the level together, right? So, like, say for example, you are wearing a headset in your office in Austin, and your art director is wearing a headset in his office in Edmonton, Canada. But you're both standing in front of each other, looking at the same thing, talking about it. Like, it sounds very like abstract and stuff like that, but the idea of like real time collaborative design that
Well,
way, I find to be just really exciting.
I know that like guys from Epic Games that realized this like soon enough, because like in Unreal, since like last year I think,
Oh yeah,
you
that's right.
can like build levels in VR, which totally makes sense, you know, like because it's all about, especially like building with game ready object. It only makes sense to build them in VR, because
Mhm.
now we have this that we talked about, the scale, like the environment where the player actually moves, so it totally makes sense what you said. So yeah, I will definitely try it, when I get a chance. So this is what you're showing now. This is also done all in VR, or this is mix?
So yeah, this actually was not done in
Oh,
VR.
okay.
This was done in 3D Coat,
Hmm.
um, but I just wanted to bring something else into Keyshot to kind of be able to fly around in while we were talking. But um, in a similar regards though to like working in VR and all those benefits that we were talking about, just in more general terms, like working in 3D, like being able to like block something out, but then like to like for example like go and create additional images from different angles, right, to showcase different things. Like I find it just be like so much fun, and it's just I don't know. I really nerd out about it, like because it there's just this really cool thing where like it's kind of like I think you had mentioned it earlier of you can start very basic, right? But then you can just zoom in and say, oh, hey, this part is really cool. And we decided, like, hey, we want to really design this out, or maybe later on there's others importance to this area. And then, like, you can just go in and add to your model and then import that back into your render scene and, just be able to, like, make almost like an entire series of images from one scene, right? So like from this one scene, I can easily do like a shot from like human perspective from these catwalks, like overlooking these massive waterfalls, like coming out of these structures, or I can do something that's kind of more like this, and like yeah, there's just so much cool stuff that like just working in 3D and in VR and all these new tools, like yes, like I think from a student or a beginner, it can be very daunting. But when you think about it, instead of it being stressful and daunting, and think about like how much fun it is, like oh, like it kind of turns into something where it's like it's actually really really exciting, and I don't know, I that's the kind of stuff I really like
Please,
geek out about.
please enlighten us. How long did it take you to make this scene? And also, like, we see like elements like water. Is this actually a geometry that you painted over later, or with a texture, or what did you do here?
So yeah, this is still a work in progress. So there's still
Okay.
a lot of stuff that I haven't addressed in here, but I it's actually mostly geometry. So a lot of the stuff times like working on personal work, I don't have the deadline of someone else or to meet. So I do tend to go a little bit further in my 3D blockouts when working on personal stuff, just because I just have fun and making cool stuff. So this I did spend a little bit more time on this one. The other thing is, and I think anyone working professionally can agree, is like it's kind of hard to find like chunks of time to work on something. So it's hard to like say how much time I've spent working on one thing when it's my personal work, because I tend to work on it for like an hour at a time over the span of like weeks or months.
Yeah.
So like this example here, like this has been in progress for a few months now. I haven't had the chance to sit down and finish it, but
Do you remember, like, I'm looking at these shapes, and like what problems did you want to solve, like when it comes to, not looking too generative, like, keeping the, like we talked about, how to make things original enough, and so on. Like, do you remember those moments when you were like solving this, when you were putting this object in array, and then breaking it with this bigger object, what was the flow of your thoughts here? What was going on?
yeah.
What was going on here? Like, is it a dam or what is it?
So yeah, the idea of this was that it's like this massive dam structure that spans over maybe a waterfall that is like 5 or 10 times larger than any waterfall that we'd be familiar with here. But I intentionally wanted the waterfall to feel almost like a giant solid wall, so that when you first look at it, it wasn't immediately apparent that this was water. But then once you realize, and I think this is something that I still probably need to address, is like once you saw the atmosphere and like the lighting quality, then you would kind of be able to realize, oh, those are waterfalls. And I think that realization, I thought could be really, really interesting. Like seeing something that at first you're like, I see that it's just massive architectural structures and what looks like a giant like flat wall, but then like having that realization that it's actually water, I think is kind of just, I don't know, like,
Oh,
uh,
like when did they upgrade the Hoover Dam?
yeah, like it. I think that realization kind of like when you look at it, it's like, oh, that's cool, that's pretty epic.
Yeah.
And then when you realize it, it's like, oh, whoa, that's actually even more epic and even cooler. But like typically at this stage, so this actually doesn't have very much painting on it. This is almost just the render right out of Keyshot.
Hmm.
So
Will,
let me
do
see.
you plan to add some humans on these platforms? Or
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, so there's actually a lot of stuff that I wanna add to this. So
hmm
this right here, this is the render right out of Keyshot, and then this is my depth pass, which I use mostly for actually making selections. I actually don't really use it for like fog that often.
Can you talk a
Uh,
bit? Sorry for interrupting you so much, but
no, no, go for it.
I'm reading letters on the side and trying to incorporate it. So, can you talk a bit more like about the passes? Okay, this is like the Z depth pass. Like, what else do you use from Keyshot?
Yeah, absolutely. So I pretty much only use the depth pass. There's other passes that are super useful. Sometimes I will render out an ambient occlusion. It depends on it. Typically with stuff that is very large scale, I won't bother rendering out an ambient occlusion. So typically I will only render out a depth pass. And I think most times the depth pass is used for creating believable atmospheric perspective and depth fog. So like I can select that and go into channels and paste that in and then use that as a selection, right? So then if I wanted to then go and just very crudely fill in some atmospheric perspective, like it should make sense and fit. But I don't usually use it that way because I like to have very specific control over painting atmosphere, because I think it's a really important and useful compositional tool. So I tend to like maintain as much control over painting that in as possible. So I actually use this more for selections. You can render out a clown pass, which will highlight each different material or object with a different color, which works really well. But once I get to this point, I really like to treat the scene as much of it like a painting as possible. So, and like you had mentioned, is like, you know, thinking of things that I can do to cut back on the preciseness and the cleanliness of the model. So I like to treat things a lot more organically and be a little bit less I guess perfect, right? So I typically will just have this on a layer above all of my other layers and constantly refer back to that to make selections. So like, you know, the nice thing about it, because it's depth, right? If you have a lot of overlapping elements, it's easy to go and like select, you know, stuff like this, right? If I only want to select the tower, right? I can just go in with the magic wand and just quickly select just that element. Or I can go and I can easily select all these areas behind it pretty quickly. And that's the thing I'm after, is like, I want to be really quick. And I hate making selections. It's one of the things I loathe most about making a painting, is like when you have a very specific thing and then you're trying to like go and make a selection like this and then sometimes you'll double tap and then you'll mess it up and have to read. I hate that. That's like, I never want to have to do that again. So like anything I can do to like make the selection process and extracting like elements from there like as quick as possible, I will do. And sometimes if I have a hard time selecting certain things, I'll go and I'll just like duplicate that off and then just like increase the contrast. So then like it increases like the levels between the picture planes, and then sometimes that makes it easier to select certain things. And also, like, if I don't get a perfect selection, I'm okay with it, because ultimately I don't really want it to be like too precise and clean, because I don't know, in nature you rarely have things that are like perfectly precise and hard edged, right? So it's nice to have, you know, a little bit more variation in your you know, I guess how crisp and clean like detail is. But at this stage, whenever I leave Keyshot and I go into Photoshop, typically the first thing I'll do is like a note pass, where I'll make notes for myself, and I'll literally go in with like, you know, red line, like just the way an art director or like a teacher would giving feedback. I'll do this for myself, and I'll go and I'll say like, okay, here's the things that I want to address. Okay, right here's kind of the focal point, but there isn't really anything that's all that interesting here. So I want to add some additional platform with like human scale stuff, right? And then that maybe also has some functional bits, right? So if this is maybe an environment for a game, maybe this is like implying some gameplay importance, or maybe there's like a platform that stands out here. Okay, and then maybe I'll sketch in like, I want to add some color variation in here, so I'll go in and I'll just kind of give myself mental notes of where I want to have value breakup or color breakup. Maybe here, and these will be a slightly different value or a different color. Maybe there'll be an accent color like yellow.
So when you're adding, in theory, when you're adding new objects to the scene, then you would go back to the 3D environment and do that, and go back here, or will you just like paint it in?
Most of the times I'll just paint it in. Once I leave like 3D, like I try to kind of stay out of it and just kind of stay focused on painting it in. But sometimes, like when it's something that is like very reliant on like having accurate perspective, or something like, for example, like this, because that'll end up being like my focal point and my main POI and stuff, I probably would go and go back to the scene and model on top of it. But more often than not, what I will do is, instead of opening the same scene, is because when it's something like this, you know, performance becomes an issue, and you know, once you start to get into detail. So what I'll do is I'll actually save this as a JPEG, and then in 3ds Max or whatever 3D program, I'll just use this as a backdrop and then match the perspective and then model on top of this. So then because I know at that point I either have my perspective, planned out, and that's not going to change, and my composition is there. So then I'll just model on top of this 2D image and then re-render it to block it back in. And then sometimes I'll just do like a completely different sketch, like from my 3D, because I just kind of want to see how far I can take it, right? So like here's another example where I rendered out a different angle, and then I just sketched on top and painted in some of these changes, right?
Okay, so these new objects here are kind of painted in.
These are all painted in.
You have
yeah.
enough lighting information on other objects, so you're just kind of color picking it and then painting it in.
Yep, exactly.
Can you give us some advice, like your like open space scenes are like very well lit, and like what's your usual flavor, when it comes to sunlight, whether after like golden hour or like give us some hints there, like how to improve our own stuff.
Yeah, so I know everything, like I feel like the go-to is to go like to golden hour, because it's just always more dramatic. You have more directional light and like longer shadows, so it's just always more interesting. But my favorite time of day and my favorite lighting scenario to paint is actually closer to noon. And I think it's like, for example, in this lighting scenario, it's actually closer to like noon or like early afternoon. And the reason for that is I really love how graphic that can make some of your shapes. Like it turns a lot of things into silhouettes, but then you have this like really strong and intense like top-down lighting that I find to be like really dramatic and kind of harsh. And I feel like when you can make like top-down or noon lighting look really good, like it just, I don't know, I find it to be really, really dramatic, especially the way it plays off of like materials, like based on their like specularity or reflectivity.
Also the shadows, it's kind of, you get like multiplied details in a scene. When all these nice shadows drop from these smaller parts especially, but also then these like big shadows that break the surface. So yeah, really, I mean, this already looks amazing.
Thank you, man. I think I mentioned it earlier that like one of my favorite things to paint is like atmosphere, because I think that like painting in atmosphere is one of those things where it can take a very static scene and turn it into something that feels like there's a sense of motion. And
teach us, master.
Well, like in this example, right? There's these very hard, heavy objects that are very monolithic and very hard-edged, and creating that contrast of having like super soft atmosphere where you get like lost and found edges to kind of like contrast the weight and monolithic nature of it. I just find to be really dramatic and just really interesting. Not only that, it's like it's kind of your main tool for like I wouldn't say your main tool, but I think it's the easiest one to establish contrast with first, right? Rather than like contrast through shape and like line direction or texture. I feel like establishing contrast through light is like it's the easiest thing to do to create a very dramatic impact on your composition. So like anytime that I can find an excuse to paint in something that helps establish the feeling of a space rather than just like what it looks like is something I'll always try to do. So like this particular location, because there's these massive waterfalls, like it should feel very humid, right? There's a lot of moisture in the air. So like anytime I have like bright hot spots and highlights, I'm going to be sure to paint in like that nice bloom, because you're going to have so much light scattering through all those water particles that are in the air. And those kind of details are like really subtle, but like it's those kind of details that really help establish not just what it looks like, but what it feels like, right? And they're really minor details, but I really feel like they can go a long way in establishing it, like the tone and the mood of a space. Because equally as important as it is to define out like what the actual shape language is and the objects that need to be built, it's equally important, and in some cases more important, to establish what it feels like, right? And what that scene is supposed to communicate to the viewer just through, these really subtle cues, like bloom and depth of field and lens flares, and I feel like there's just a certain amount of dynamic quality that can be added to it. Like for example, also like here, like the sun position is probably like up in this corner, but then like right above us. So like looking at a lot of photography of lighting scenarios similar to that, you'd get a lot of light leak kind of coming through the lens. So like I like to paint that kind of stuff too. Like it's a detail that's not necessarily super important, but like those little details add up to make something that just feels more tangible and just like believable, right? So painting in a little bit of that light leak, right, is it's just really fun, and it just adds a level of drama.
Yeah, definitely. Then we also have like separation of color. So like white separates in like red, green, and blue, and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's like a lot to explore in this kind of in this kind of environments and things that you talked about. So where like when you say like painting the atmosphere is maybe your favorite part of the job, do you have anyone to like any other artist to mention there, or someone like who inspired you, or maybe even a literature maybe someone you learned from? Do you have
It sounds like a super big cop out, but like the main ones that I think inspired me for like painting atmosphere are probably like the old like Hudson River school of painting, like the Albert Bierstadt and Thomas Cole, and the way that they were able to like just add so much drama. They did,
if I remember correctly, if I understand, like it was an American association or club, right? And they did a lot of like these huge landscapes, right? If I remember it well, I'm not sure because it's not my domain. But if I can remember it correctly, they did like this amazing like landscapes with a lot of greenery and water and.
Yeah, it's there. Let's see. Hopefully, this doesn't take too long to load. I'm trying to pull it up on YouTube. On Google. But well, anyways, so their big motivation was like, so at that time, plein air painting was kind of just about trying to capture a specific moment, and capture that on a canvas, right? But their way of painting was more about capturing what it felt like to stand in that presence, because they would go and do these like expeditions to like the Caribbean, and do these like you said, like these epic paintings of these massive landscapes. But there's no way to like capture in the painting the emotion of standing in the presence of such grand landscapes, right? So they would intentionally romanticize them by amping up the drama through lighting and making the atmosphere feel just more tangible and stuff like that. So they were all informed by reality, by these studies and these plein air paintings that they would do.
But the only difference is they did it in oil.
Well, yeah. But like the emphasis though was painting the feeling of standing in front of those epic landscapes, and they would do that by amping up the atmosphere and the lighting, because that's kind of what just amps up the drama, right? So they inherently still feel believable and kind of have a photographic quality to them, but they're just all so much more dramatic, right? Like by looking at one of those paintings, like how those clouds were rolling through the cliffs, like what it felt like to have that dappled light of the sun kind of coming through the clouds and breaking into this valley, and just that epic quality of those landscapes. That's something I'm always trying to capture, because again, when you're creating concept art, I feel like concept art should never be really 100% indicative of reality. It never really should be. I think part of the job of a concept artist is to design an ideal world, right? So I say ideal in terms of like beauty or visual interest, right? Like we have the power and the tools to essentially design things however we want, right? So it should never just be about designing an object or a location or a shape language of like a faction or whatever. It really should be about describing what is the ideal version of that idea.
But
right?
we do this even with the phone camera. We're kind of designing the shot.
Yeah, totally.
So, yeah.
Taking the selfie from the right angle, right?
And like
it's just presenting reality in a way that is just a more visually pleasing way. And not only that, it also just helps for establishing a visual quality bar for everyone else. When there's so many people involved in the process, when you have a piece of artwork that is so ideal in terms of the quality of the lighting or the atmosphere or the shapes and stuff like that, you just overall have like a higher level quality for everyone else to kind of strive for. If you're starting off with designing something that is bare bones and is capturing or emulating reality as is, like, I feel like there's only the possibility for it to like maintain that level of quality instead of trying to strive for better, I guess. I don't know. That's a really convoluted way of saying.
No, I mean this only proves that you really spend a lot of thinking on things that you do and analyzing, which I think. So I mean, this is what I call like painting or doing art while you're not actually doing art, like solving problems, while not painting directly, and it's good because like young I don't know why I'm saying young artists, but artists in general, they have a lot of questions, for other artists, better artists, more experienced artists, how to do this and how to do that, and but like a good practice for everyone is also like to like spend a lot of thinking about like what you're gonna do next day or whatever, like it's also like a good practice, and I think when we talk about Hudson River School and their and people involved in it, like what could you do back then? You didn't have like photo references of stuff. You what you needed to do was like a lot of thinking about the subject that you were about to paint, and it wasn't just like observing and doing the painting, I guess they also had a lot of this situation, going to bed and not being able to sleep because they're like constantly visualizing how will they solve certain problem, how do they paint this cloud, or because next day they won't see it anymore because there won't be a cloud there anymore. So
yep.
Anyways, I'm going in different directions here. So but like we were talking for a lot, I think like almost like 2.5 hours. So
oh man, has it been that much already?
Yeah. I mean, I usually try to cut it after 1 hour, hour and a half, but it's been interesting, I think, and I hope for others as well who join us. If there's anything else you want to add, like please do, and yeah.
No, well, yeah. Thanks for everyone who is in the chat. I appreciate everyone coming and hearing me ramble for 2 hours. And yeah, Marco, I really appreciate you inviting me on. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. I'm really sorry now, even more than before, that we never got you to the event, and I'm not really certain about the future of the event. We'll see. If it happens in the future, I'll definitely do my best to get you here. To do some live coaching or whatever.
Well,
Uh,
awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
uh, yeah, thanks so much. Thanks everyone for joining us. I apologize if I didn't answer or present some of your questions to Ken. But I think you got like a lot of information, a lot of beautiful images from Ken. I think you did like a really great job explaining a lot of your workflow, and the way you think about your creations. And who knows? I mean, sometimes in the future maybe we can do like another session, maybe touch some like different topics or whatever. But anyway,
I
like,
would love to.
yeah, it would be great, I think. And thanks for joining. Thanks everyone else. And yeah, please share this stream with your friends on Facebook. And if you liked it, please leave a comment below in comment section as well, so others who stumble upon this can uh, like be motivated to listen to it. And because I think like from guys like Ken and also others that we have, like, you really can learn a lot. So yeah, that's it. Thanks, and we'll be in touch soon. Ken, you can stay on the line. I'll just stop streaming in a while, and I'll do this in a moment. Stop streaming. Okay, now we'll have